to be talking about the dark night of the soul, not the story beat, but our own personal roadblocks per se, as we try to work through and finish our wonderful stories that we have bottled up inside of us somewhere. So I would like to go ahead and start off with just some quick introductions. What we'll do is we'll just go one panel at a time. I see Lani first, and then Michaelbrent. And just take a minute, tell a little bit about yourself. And then also for the audience, I am observing the chat channel. So if you have any questions or comments or things like that, feel free to toss them in there. And I will try to kind of gear the conversation and make sure that we're talking about the things that you would like to hear from everybody today. So let's go ahead and start with Lani.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Lani Forbes. I'm a young adult fantasy author. And so my books are The Seventh Son. And book 2 in my Seventh Son series actually comes out on Tuesday. So I'm really excited. I wish I could be there with everybody in person to celebrate the release, but I'm really excited. So both of those are through Blackstone Publishing. And book 3 should be coming out next year as well. And I was a math and science teacher for 10 years. Until I became an author full-time, and I'm actually finishing a master's degree in clinical psychology with an emphasis in trauma. So this is definitely a panel I'm excited to talk about.
Wow. So like right off the bat, I'm super impressed because you were able to point to the right books, and I'm constantly like,
yeah, right.
So low expectations for me, guys, in comparison. My name's Michaelbrent Collings. See, I did it. And I'm an international bestseller. I'm one of the top indie genre authors in the United States. Focus on horror, but I've written bestsellers all over the place. And I've written a couple movies and good stuff. So,
yay! I realized I probably should introduce myself a little bit too. I'll do shorter. I'm Brandon Ho. I'm a director, writer at Stronger Winds Productions. So I've written a couple of features. Second one should be launching sometime this month if all goes well.
awesome.
And, I've done shorts and things like that have won student Emmys and other awards. It's a fun time. It's a good time. And it's also a dark time during the process. So speaking about dark times,
Segue.
yeah, for me as a writer, I found that while developing stories, that I always get to a point where I hate it, and I hate myself, and I hate everything that I've done up to that point. And for me, it's usually at the end of what you would call like Act 2. Because I'll outline, I get all the ideas, I'm like, this is amazing, I'm like, this is the best. And then I started off, and I'm like, a strong opening, this is good. And then I work through Act 2, and I'm like, what did I do to myself? And then by the time I'm at Act 3, where I should be wrapping it up, I'm like, I don't even know why I'm wrapping this up. Like, who would care? I don't care. Why would I expect anyone else to care? And so that's my moment that I recognize. I'm curious, is your moment the same? Like, where do you find that usually you hate yourself or your story or just the process the most while you're developing it? We'll start with
Lani.
Oh, want me to start? Okay. I'd actually say probably the same, kind of in Act 2. I always love my beginning. I get super passionate and excited about, yeah, this is so awesome. This world sounds cool. You're getting to know your characters, and then like I always have my endings in my head at least, so I'm super excited. I know where I'm going, but then it's that like middle part of like I know I'm here and I know I want to get here, but I don't like how I'm doing it, and that tends to be where I get stuck too. Yeah.
Totally. For me, I don't know. Like I'm good at self-loathing, so I'll come up with this. Look, everybody's got to have a talent. So I'll come up with this idea that I'm happy with, and it could be by the end of the first page that I'm really like having second thoughts, but I've already invested all that time, that first page. So I keep going, but my wife knows at some point during the process, I am going to come down the stairs and I have this face, and it's like, I tell her, I go, this is the one, I've written like 40 books, and this is the one where they're going to realize not only do I suck, but that I've always sucked. And I'm going to have strangers showing up at the house to like punch me in the crotch for wasting their time on a book they read 8 years ago. Like, this is the one that just tips it over into universal hatred. And it's funny because, like, I know it's happening, and I'm sure the others can say the same. But just because you know intellectually it's happening doesn't negate its power over you.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's funny that you bring up your wife, because my poor wife, like, I will finish something and I'll just give it to her. I'll be like, yeah, I ruined it all. You can look at it, but don't, I'm not expecting anything from it. And then she'll read it and be like, no, like, it's great. I think you did some good stuff. It needs to be worked on. I'm like, oh, trust me, I know. She's like, but there's good stuff there. I'm like, no. And then, like, after like a week later, I have to like come back, and then I open it up. I'm like, oh, okay, like, she's right, I'm wrong. There is some good stuff here. So
Like, if you want to divorce me, I'll understand.
I'll understand. Read this book, because you'll know that I'm a fraud. But yeah, I love all that. So one thing about that is that I think we all experience this, right? And so part of my process, once I'm in that kind of hate mode, is just recognizing that. Like, I tell myself, okay, I'm going to get to this point of self-loathing. I'm going to get to this point where I don't think my story is of any value. And that's okay, because that's part of the process. And that's a technique that I use to kind of push myself through to finish the story when I am at that point and I'm like, I don't even want to finish the story anymore. Starting with Michaelbrent Collings, is there like any techniques or like kind of personal mantras that you use to kind of get yourself through to finish the project?
It's funny because that part is so hard for everybody. But in a way, I think full-time authors, we do have a leg up, and it's not the time invested, but it's like, what else am I going to do? I mean, as if you're someone who's doing it as a hobby still, and by the way, anybody doing it as a hobby and they're enjoying it and they've got like medical coverage through their job and stuff, you're winning, and it hits me and I'm going, I feel depressed and I feel terrible about this, but I've got to pay the bills and I don't have the luxury of just putting it aside and going, I'll come back to it. So there's that, money is a real motivator. And I don't mean it like, I just mean like, oh crap, it's either this or rejoin the exciting fast-paced world of pizza delivery.
Yeah, Lani, you?
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's so funny is I feel like every project I do, I almost forget that I get to that point at some point. And like you said, it's reminding yourself that is part of the process and that this is going to happen. And I always seem to forget. And I don't know if it's like childbirth where they joke that like, after you have a baby, you totally forget how awful it was. But like, I feel like I get into that sometimes and I'm like, I don't know. I feel stuck. I can't do this. And same thing. My husband's really good at like, you go through this every book. And I'm like, no, I don't. He's like, yeah, you do. And so I think being aware that it's coming is really helpful. And for me, my biggest strategy is just, I'm a huge believer in like reaching out to other people, because we think of being an author as such like a solitary, lonely kind of profession where we just sit in our rooms at our laptops, with our berets as we stare out the window and drink our coffee and that kind of stuff. But I think, yeah, or McDonald's, that works too. But I think for me, my biggest help is reaching out to people that I really connect with, other writers. Like I said, reaching out to my husband, having him remind me, like, you go through this every time. And I'm like, I do? Yes, you do. It's okay. Or reaching out to writer friends who can, okay, well, let's sit down and let's look at this together. Or let's, bounce ideas back and forth. Let's just go grab coffee and just kind of have fun with this a little bit. And so for me, my biggest strategy is definitely reaching out to people, especially other authors if I can.
Yeah, I think that writers groups are great for that kind of stuff, especially because, money is a good motivator, but also at the same time, if you're sitting there writing garbage and then, you're meeting with your writers group like that week or something, you just say, well, I have to finish this garbage anyways because I have to have something to show for it. So, yeah, that's definitely a good way to go.
It's funny that you say that because like I've never, and this is anytime I say like, well, I don't do that or they do, anyone watching, I assume you all want to be involved in books on some level, but you put all these writers up against the wall and say, how did it work for you? And you're going to get every one of them telling you something different. Yeah, it's like, what's the secret to your success? Well, I can tell you the secret to Michaelbrent's success, or, but I have no idea for Lani. I have no idea for anybody else. And so, me personally, I've never reached out to another author to say, like, oh, I feel sad because this sucks and people are going to punch me later. But I do think it's really important to know that they're there. I mean, to know that you're not alone, even if you're not talking to someone right now, but you're like, I have a group. This is a profession. And if you're getting into it professionally, particularly, there's a group of people who have your back, And if you go on the convention circuit, and you do things like that, you're going to meet these people, and just knowing, oh, hey, I'm going to see Lani, I'm going to see Dave Butler, I'm going to see Paul, I'm going to see one of my friends, and be able to sit down at that point and just know that they know what I'm going through. So even though it is solitary, we're sitting in our rooms. I mean, there's no way around that. And even if you're at Starbucks, you're still sitting by yourself. And that is hard. But there is something to be said for making sure you have the connections in your hip pocket, so that when those dark nights happen, it's kind of subconscious, like, well, people are there for me, and not just my family, and they're tremendously important, but my wife doesn't understand at the most basic levels what this is. She knows how to accommodate it and how not to talk to me when I'm mumbling to myself and stuff. But she doesn't know what the process feels like. And so having somebody there is really nice. And I always encourage authors of any level, like, make sure your author life has some sort of structural support. It can't just be the words. It has to be people.
Right. Now, I'm curious since I do a lot of film writing and stuff like that, I'm at the point now where when I write, I have a co-writer that I work with. Her name is Ashley Nielsen. I actually met her at LTUE. She's awesome. But her and I write a lot of stuff together, so that gives me my first outlet of someone to bounce my writing back and forth off of. And then, of course, it's going to producers and different people as we try to get the process greenlit. So I kind of have my core group of industry people that are reading my works and giving me feedback off of that I do to produce my content. For the novels that you write, who are your go-to people? Like, how do you find that network of those that you show your writing to help you improve your drafts?
Yeah, I think professional organizations are really helpful, like meeting people through LTUE. Like, I have a critique partner that she and I met at LTUE last year. And like, when we all went into lockdown at the beginning of 2020, like right after LTUE happened, and I just was like really struggling, she was like, okay, well, let's get on Skype. We're going to meet every day from this time to this time for this next week. And I'm going to sit here and force you to write. And so for me, I was so grateful that I had met her, and I had met her through LTUE. Or I have a group of writers that I work with that I met through SCBWI, which is the Society for Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. And I think sometimes, yeah, and I think sometimes just getting involved in some of those professional writing communities, like here in Idaho, we have the Idaho Writers Guild. I love Romance Writers of America because I'm secretly a romance writer at heart. But there's always professional organizations that, like, if you're willing to reach out and get involved, you can make those connections and meet people.
Right.
Yeah, and it comes back so much to people. And it's, in spite of the fact that writers are very solitary, the more you can find and cultivate an appreciation for other people, the better off your writing's going to be. And not just because of this long, dark night of the soul stuff, but just because you're going to love the thing that you're writing about and the thing that you're writing to. And love letters are tremendously attractive to people. It doesn't matter if somebody isn't your favorite person. If they're talking good about you, you're going to listen. And so the more we can find this real appreciation for people, I think the more it helps us, because we're sending out, instead of a product solely, And I do think my writing's a product. I don't think it's like babies. I tell people I make hamburgers. And if this one doesn't work, I'll put pickles on it or I'll take them off or whatever. And that makes editing a lot easier. But I'm not just McDonald's chucking stuff across. Hey man, it makes it easier to change stuff up. I don't have to do this kill my babies thing. But I want to give like a good product where I'm handing it to the person being like, I made this hamburger just for you. And they like that better. And it comes across and it helps us be more mentally healthful as authors and as creators, filmmakers, everything.
Yeah, and something I'll say too is I have found the more that I go on, when I get to something where I hate it or I don't like it, usually that's my first kind of intuitive spark to say, okay, what is not working here for me? It was actually just yesterday. I was struggling through an act 2 of a story, and I sat down with my writer, and I just said, hey, let's look at the premise of this story, and we wrote down a list of like, if this was the story that we're doing, if this is kind of our wish fulfillment, what are things that we would want to do or see or experience? And we just wrote down like all the fun stuff that we would hope to be able to gain insight in if we were in that situation. And after we got that list, it was then like this one would actually work well here and this will work here. And we started re-outlining kind of that process and applying and kind of crafting our story so that it had those kind of fun elements in it. What other techniques or things might you try to do when you find that you're in those spots where it's not quite working for you, to break through that kind of barrier and find the fun and the love again of when you first started the story?
I jump in on this. Like, I loved so much that you said you go back and you find the fun stuff. And we are doing something so fun. I mean, we didn't get into it because it's like, well, I hate writing and all the pain and stress of being an author sounds super horrible, so let's do that. It's like we want to tell these stories. And it drives me nuts when some guy on Major League Baseball, he's like, I'm making $30 million and it's just not fun anymore. I'm like, dude, you're playing a game and you love the game. And that's not to negate that there's hard parts, working out and tearing your muscles and having injuries. That's hard. And us having these days where we're like, honey, everyone's going to discover I suck. This is the one, those are hard. But we're still doing this magic. We get to do this amazing thing every day. And that's one of the things my wife actually says. She's like, if you're not enjoying this, why are you not a lawyer anymore? Like, let's go back and you can be an attorney. And she's totally right. I mean, one of the things that helps is just to remember that this is awesome.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Like, and that's what I have to remind myself too. I'm like, we're making movies. Like, how cool is that? Lottie, do you feel the coolness when you're writing those stories?
Absolutely. And like you said, going back and trying to, what was the seed of this idea that got you so excited in the first place? And, tapping into that. And for me, a lot of times I go back and I like to look at kind of, the outline, or I love, like, one of my favorite strategies too is I love learning, and that tends to get me excited, and it tends to like get me in the right mindset again. And so like coming to a conference like this, or reading a really good book that like talks about screenwriting, or I just went to a workshop that was this amazing screenwriter from Hollywood, and hearing his passion about story. And I had been stuck kind of similarly. I had been stuck around act 2 of this project I'm working on right now. And after taking that workshop and hearing him talk about different things, I could just feel like I could get back into that kind of creative headspace, and being able to get back into that place where I can get excited, because it almost feels like a mode that I can get into. And sometimes if I get pulled out of that mode, it's hard to get back in. So just knowing for myself, what are those things that can help get me back into that creative mindset? And for me, that's, meeting with other people that are writers, and workshops and conferences, that kind of stuff tends to get me in that super excited place.
Awesome. Michaelbrent, what do you do to get in that excited place?
Well, okay. So like, obviously, well, the biggest thing is just finishing something. You're like, yay, I never have to do that again. And people go, what's your favorite thing? And I go, my last completed book is always my favorite thing because it's done and I can just revel that I completed it. But I love something Lani said, because she's like talking about doing workshops and doing these other artistic things. Because I think one of the traps, particularly that newer authors are likely to get into, is to think that if I'm not doing a word count, I'm not writing. And honestly, typing is just one part of this umbrella of writing. And so if you're having a rough day, my wife, she's great. She'll come in and go, you need to go watch a movie today. You're mopey. You're not enjoying this. And so go watch a movie. And I'm still writing because I'll take a pen and paper and I'll write notes about, why the newest X-Men movie is the worst ever and how I would have done it better and things like that. Or I do all my own covers and taking a minute to start researching the cover I'm going to put together and, doing marketing. And again, reaching out and talking to fans if you have emails to answer or if you have emails to make. If you want to do this as a business, you're going to reach out and say, hey, I'd love to be on your podcast to whoever. And at first it's going to be like momandpoppodcast.com with a listenership of 2, one of whom is the sound engineer. And you're going to build up from that. But all of that's part of writing. It's not just about hammering on keys. Writing is a world. And it's not just a world for the reader. It's an entire universe of things that we as authors get to do. And one of the best parts is we get to be professionally ignorant. Like, we just get to learn forever. And if you're a 41-year-old, 45-year-old, 50-year-old lawyer, you can't go in and go, I have no idea. Because you look like an idiot and people are like, why am I paying you? But if you're an author or a filmmaker or a sculptor, any kind of artistic thing, you get to ask, I wonder what that's all about. And people are just like, that's cool. He's a moron because he's an author and it's expected. But I get to look at whatever I want. I get to do whatever I want and I get to freak. I'm sure the NSA has this huge file on me.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned doing other things, still being writing, like it not being the word count. I've actually trying to be healthier and stuff, try to bike into this office space, which is about 10 kilometers of biking. So I get to bike for a little while and I find that I have a lot of breakthroughs and thoughts and moments and story ideas while biking. Somebody actually asked any recommendations about books about craft that maybe got you super back into that super excited place. For me, it's not necessarily books, it's video essays. So like if you check out Every Frame of Painting on YouTube, those are some phenomenal video essays that break down just like movies or directors or crafts and things like that. And just watching something like that just gets me excited to do it again. What type of like books?
Because I'm taking notes. What was that thing?
Oh, Every Frame of Painting.
See, professionally stupid.
But are there any type of like books or things that you go to that kind of get you back in that excited place?
For me, yeah, I'm a nerd when it comes to craft books. So yeah, I have let's see if I could grab a couple of them from back here. But like some of my favorites are I love the Save the Cat books. I know a lot of some people think that they're pretty basic or I don't know, but I feel like they're a great place to start if I'm feeling stuck. I especially love Jessica Brody's Save the Cat Writes a Novel. I feel like she has these genre breakdowns where if I'm ever stuck, I like to sit down and figure out, okay, what genre does my book fit into? What are those key elements that she recommends that you have in each of those genres? So I love her book. I love Story Genius by Lisa Cron. That one's amazing. Any book by Donald Moss. I love his like writing the breakthrough or breakout novel, The Fire in Fiction. Those are all really good. I also love James Scott Bell. He's got some really good books too. I think his was like one of the first books I read, like Plot and Structure by James Scott Bell. But I tend to love Donald Moss's stuff a lot. Those are just some of the ones I can think of off the top of my head. Anything by K.M. Wieland also is really helpful. She has an amazing blog, and a newsletter where she talks just a lot about story in general. And I got to just attend a workshop by Michael Hogg. Hogg, I don't know how to say his last name. Hogg, yeah. So I just finished doing a whole day workshop from him, and I just was like, I had like pages and pages of notes. That was just amazing. And so there's so many resources out there. If you look, there's just tons of places to look.
And I'll say this, if anyone's like scrambling to write everything down super fast, I believe LTUE has it set up that they can rewatch these up to a month. They'll have them up for everyone to review. So
your cool way of saying like don't fumble for the pen again, that was not professional looking.
Well, I tried to be graceful about it. Hey, speaking of Michaelbrent Collings, what books get you in the excited place?
I don't read a lot of craft. I'm going to be honest, I don't read a lot of craft books anymore. I listen to podcasts and stuff like that. Like I really like Joanna Penn's The Creative Pen, and she's been doing it for 10 years. So there's tons of stuff, and she's actually a friend of mine, and just I love her to pieces, and it's marvelous content. So I'll listen to that. But whenever I'm really looking to dig into craft, I tend to go to a fiction book, and again, it's like watching that movie. I'll really crack into what makes this work. I remember reading Misery, the Stephen King book, 5 or 6 years ago. And I was really looking at it because in addition to this really cool story, it's also a meditation on the creative process. And as I read that, just kind of going, oh, that's really neat. Not just what he said, but the way he chose to say it. And I always like seeing other authors' idiosyncrasies, because one of the most wonderful things about language is what an infectious disease it is, like we're gloriously infected with these ideas and these concepts. And I do like craft books. I recommend Save the Cat to everybody starting out because it's nuts and bolts. It's not theory. It's like, here are things that have worked. And that's very useful as a springboard. But after you read, 100, 200 of them, they start getting repetitious. And so I'd rather go to the person who wrote the book and read one of his fiction books, or go to the person who did the podcast and read her latest story. And that is so educational. If you want to write, if you're really desperate to get better, find somebody who's so good it depresses you, and then go through it with a notebook. Read and make notes, liner notes and stuff like that. I can't tell you the number of books I've purchased because I realized in Barnes & Noble, I was sitting down and writing notes on a book I hadn't bought yet. And I was like, well, I guess I'm taking this one home.
Nice.
I want to second that, because I think I'm a firm believer in creativity begets creativity. And I think, finding those books that like when you read them, you're like, I wish I could write like this. And reading them and studying them, because I would do the same thing. When I was writing my first novel, I would sit down with a lot of my favorite books and sit down. How did this writer do their first chapter? How did they structure this? And I would study, how did they introduce us to this character in a way that made me care about this character so much? And just reading other books that you really admire and look up to. And that's an easy way to get into that creative mindset too, because it inspires you and it gets you motivated to keep going. And movies too. I got super motivated by watching the Witcher series. Just for some reason, I love that show so much. And I don't know why, but after watching it, but even just the story, just watching it afterwards, I was like, I have to go write. I must write.
Yeah.
Yeah, and talking about the Save the Cat books, I will say that as someone who has studied media narrative structure for my degree, I think Save the Cat is really good for watching, analyzing, and breaking down stories. And then I would say there's also a flip side. If you listen to a podcast called Script Notes, it's 2 screenwriters in Hollywood, and one of them gives a full breakdown of how he approaches screenwriting. And it's funny because he actually tosses aside and says, oh, all those analysis ones are terrible. But he actually makes a good point in the sense that he says that you're looking at a completed product and tearing it down.
Yeah.
His process is about how do you start and build a product out of it. So yeah, script notes, how to write a story or something along those lines. If you look up script notes, you can find it. It's Craig Mason. He did Chernobyl. He's amazing. And then just segue real quick, are there other podcast recommendations that you guys listen to? For me, it's Script Notes, the Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith. He interviews screenwriters, and then Writing Excuses with Brandon Sanderson and all the other amazing people of that group.
You got any, Lani? You mentioned most of mine. I'm partial to anyone that'll have me on as a guest.
I'm just kind of starting to break into the podcast world a little bit because I'm mostly into reading craft books, but I have a friend who's super into writing podcasts, and she'll send me episodes, or she'll have recommendations for me all the time. But yeah, I've listened to a couple episodes of like Brandon Sanderson's. I really enjoyed. Yeah, I wish I knew more about podcasts. They're something that I really want to get into, but I also have a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old, and so sitting down to listen to podcasts isn't something I have a lot of time.
I got you. You're a superwoman.
I get that. I got 4 kids. I know. Okay, I want to dive in. This person's got kind of a 2-part question, so we're going to tackle one at a time. But he's basically wanting to work on having a consistent process of writing and writing through the first draft, even when he hates it. Is there any advice that you have for him?
Work with who you are. You hear about consistent. I have really bad physical problems, some maladies that make it impossible for me to sit up some days. And I have mental health issues, which lead to the long, dark night of the soul. And so sometimes we look at ourselves and we're like, well, this leader of industry, Jeff Bezos, wakes up at 4:30 and spends 5 minutes having his morning poop, and then 6 minutes drinking coffee. And then, it's like all this regimented. And we think if we could do that, we'll have that kind of output. I can't. And so part of it is, if you want to be regular, if you want to have a regular final product, you have to find that for you. And for some people, that's going to mean Saturday's my writing day, and every other day is not going to be writing. I mean, Lani is a mom, and like I have 4 kids too, but moms are just epic, and they're so important. And my wife, she recognizes, well, I'm going to have this time for my thing I want, and then all this other time is for the kids and for the infant she married. And you have to recognize the limitations of your own life, because you can't impose like someone else's template on your reality. It's just a nightmare.
Amen.
Yeah. I think, just the idea of know thyself and know what you can and can't do and what you can and can't handle. And for me, I am a mom. I'm working on a master's degree. I'm trying to write books. I don't have a lot of time to just sit down and like schedule, and I'm not good at that anyway. I'm kind of a butterfly with that. So I tend to do a lot of my writing on my phone, which a lot of people don't like to do. But I wrote almost all of my first book on my phone, just in between stuff with kids. If we were at the park and I'm sitting on the bench watching my kids play on the playground, I'd pull out my phone and I'd work on a chapter. Or, I'm up at 2 a.m. with a newborn baby who I'm afraid to move because he's asleep on me. And I'm like, well, I'll pull out my phone and write. And so I think you just kind of figure out whatever works for you and your schedule. And I wish I could schedule time of like, I'm going to always write on Saturdays, or I'm going to always write at this time. And I do try to do that if I'm on deadline. Like I had to get my manuscript for book 3 turned in on time. And accountability was a really helpful thing with me. Again, that's where I like to lean on other writers, of having that friend of mine that I had met at LTU. He was like, okay, we're going to get on Skype at this time, and I'm going to sit here and I will write my stuff and you will write your stuff. And I'm less likely to flake on that if I have someone else holding me accountable.
Yeah.
So I tend to lean on other people pretty hard if I have like a specific deadline. So I'm like, make me write.
I do think it's important, if we're going to talk about productivity, we talk about like a balance, like we're trying to have balance in life, which I've never liked, because I have this image of someone on a tightrope, and if they can only put exactly, excuse me, the right amount of weight on each side of their pole, they can hold infinite weight. And it's just not true. And so part of it is prioritizing, and as much as I joke about my wife doing everything, I try and put in good dad time and good husband time. And those are important. And I try and be active with church stuff, and that's important. And then, of course, I'm writing. And so if you have your life, you really do have to look at it and go, okay, is Netflix time more important to me than writing time? That's totally legit. I mean, if you're not doing it full time, that's cool. But then that's a choice you've made. And you don't have to bitch and gripe about not finishing a book this year. You chose to have Netflix laid back time, and heaven knows we need that right now, especially with all the crazy. And that's okay. Mm-hmm. But then saying, oh, I didn't finish 20,000 words, what does that gain you? It just makes you feel like crap. So be aware whenever you make a choice, this is my decision for the future as well as for now. And that also helps you make decisions about priorities, because you're going, Netflix is really important. I'm going to kill someone if I don't have some downtime. But that'll allow me to write tomorrow. Or I just don't feel like writing this month. And next month, I can't look back and say, oh, it was a wasted month. It wasn't. I did what I wanted to do. I did exactly the thing I was dreaming of.
Yeah.
I think, like you said, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, whatever it is, though, don't think that you're the only person that can't write, and don't hate yourself because of it, because we all go through it in some form or another. And I think it's important to recognize that within yourself too.
And we have to take time for self-care, because the reality is, like, if you are drained and you have spent so much of your mental and emotional energy on other things, if you're struggling with mental health stuff, which I struggle with as well, and if I'm not handling that and managing that well, I'm not going to be able to write. If I try to sit down and create, if I haven't taken care of my own mental health, if I haven't taken care of making sure that I'm in a good place mentally, I can't write, because it literally just gets in the way. If you're, struggling with stress and overwhelmed, especially, it puts you in the state of, I'm going to get into my master's psychology stuff here, but if your stress system is activated, if your sympathetic nervous system is activated, the part of your brain that even does creativity isn't going to be functioning because it's shut down. It's like, that's not survival important, so that goes away. So taking the time to get yourself in the right frame of mind and take care of yourself and make sure that you're not in that fight or flight survival response, I think is really important.
Yeah. And, I listened to a screenwriter say once that not writing is writing. And it kind of made me chuckle a little bit. But they're like, oh, when you get a writer's block, like, what do you do? He's like, well, not writing is writing. So he'll go for walks. He'll do those kind of things. And I started to try applying that. And it's amazing how true that is. Because the reality is we are creating something, and we're creating something from our own personal experiences. Because that's all that we have to pull on. And so if you are trying to create family dynamics and character relationships and romances and those kind of things, like, you have to have your own personal life where you have relationships and you're living these dynamics with people and you're out experiencing life. Because if you're not living life, then what type of things are you experiencing that you're going to want to put out that you think is valuable for the world to see? And so I think it is really important to take that time to treat yourself well and to just live.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see if there's another comment in here. Someone mentioned something about validation through rubbing shoulders, which is something that made me chuckle. Validation.
Do that after the restraining order.
As attending having a panel with authors validates my pain in writing. And then someone posted this wonderful GIF of someone holding a crying person saying, I feel your pain.
We all feel your pain.
We all feel your pain. I'll say this, that sometimes like when someone gives me something to read for feedback, I'll say, what is it that you're looking for? Because there is a lot of there's a lot of positive that can come from someone reading a story to say, hey, I liked it, you're great, you're wonderful, you're awesome. There's also a purpose for having someone read it and say, here is every single little thing I found that's wrong with it. But if you're looking for someone to read it and say, it's not the worst book in the world, you're not the worst person in the world, I love you and I love your stories, and instead they say, here's all the stuff that's wrong with it, it's not going to be a good experience. So I think that sometimes too, that made me laugh, but sometimes it is good when you hand a work over for criticism or for feedback to actually state what it is that you're looking for from that reader.
There's nothing wrong with just saying, I think I suck today. Read this, and even if it does suck, say it's good. Say something nice about me. Like, go to the people who love you and say, I need a mental and emotional hug. Whether you're there to actually hold me in COVID, I just need someone to look at this page. You don't even have to read it. Just pretend and then go, this is good. Because I'll rip it apart later. I'm not done editing. And everybody needs that. Everybody needs to be able to go and have someone love them. I ask my kids all want to be writers at some point, as they're growing. And they'll inevitably come to me and say, read this. And I can tell they want me to tell them it's the best thing that has ever been written. And I'll do just that. And then later they'll come and they've matured a little. And I ask them, I say, are you wanting me to read this as your dad? Because I will, and I'll love it. Are you wanting me to read this as a professional trying to help you be better? That's a very different experience. And it's mostly unpleasant for the person who's getting the critique. But sometimes we all need to just walk up to our spouse or our friend and say, just tell me something nice about me. Make it up if you have to. But I need that. And that's a really good sign of mental health, is being able to ask for that.
Right. Lani, do you have anything to add?
I'm like shaking my head going, yep. I'm a firm believer in attachment theory in psychology. It's kind of my theoretical orientation with my master's, and we are social creatures. We are meant to turn to others for comfort in times of distress. And like, if you take anything away from what to do in Dark Night of the Soul, I would just say turn to others for comfort in times of distress, because I truly believe that's one of the most important things we can do.
Yes, and my last words on that will just be, if you feel like it's terrible, if you think that it's bad, if you think that it's not as good as it could be happy about that, because that means that you're better now than you were before, and that's progress, and that's something that we should all celebrate. Thank you, and thank you, everybody.